My arm was covered in bruises the size of thumbprints. The side of my face hurt from being pushed up against the pole you tied me to like I'd been clocked good once, the tenderness extending down my neck and into my shoulder. You tied my hands and bent me over, asked if I could slide my hands further down, and so I slid them almost to the floor and felt my face against the hard surface. When the side of my face began to ache, I worried I'd be bruised there and wouldn't be able to hide it. The bruise never appeared, but if it had, what I worried was that other people would see the bruise and recognize it for what it was, but not for what it wasn't. One does not go to work the world with a bruised face, a fat lip, the mark of another's hands on them, without provoking a series of unanswerable questions. This is the first time I have been tied to a pole. More significantly, this is only the second time I have been tied up. Somehow my mind doesn't go to the way my friend Siobhan was tied to a chair, gagged, and then strangled to death in an abandoned building. It is beyond me why I have chosen to trust a man in this way. Is there a thing beyond me operating? How foolish, how liberating, how potentially deadly. As I understand it, a lover is a person one can speak frankly to. You can beg a lover to tie you up, or a lover can propose to tie you up. Because I learned as a baby that needs are a thing best kept quiet and deep, I often fail at speaking frankly, and when I do, I am afraid. Often I don't know what it is I want or want to say. When you read this, I want you to know I am trying my best to speak straight, not sideways. I'm trying not to speak different out both sides of my mouth while swallowing the center. In other words, I promise not to tell you I love you and then kill you. The U.S. Department of Justice collected data on violent crimes in 2011. Approximately 90.5% of known convicted murders were committed by men. This did not surprise me. Here is what did. Only 23.2% of murder victims were women. Then I looked at the statistics for victims of other violent crimes, like rape, and my surprise disappeared somewhat. If a great enough shock to the system kills off the relationship a woman has with her body, this is not death exactly, but it is the death of a way of being. Often the body becomes a carrier not only of the mind, but also of a constant, seemingly untouchable pain. The explanations of the mechanisms by which these pains appear are abstract, but the hurt and the how come are dishearteningly clear. How unlikely then that two women in my life have been murdered. Here are their names: Siobhan Gahagan, bound, gagged, and strangled to death by her so-called ex-boyfriend and his two friends as part of a satanic ritual in 1998. Judy Calder, my mother, stabbed to death by her so-called friend in 2007 over an outstanding loan. If you want to know more, which everyone always does, you can search for their names online and you will find them, and eventually me. You'll see a 16-year-old girl and then a 24-year-old girl trying to talk about murder, as I am now still trying to do, and stumbling again. During the trial of my mother's murderer, the defense played videos of detectives interrogating him. He moved rapidly from topic to topic. He was a good talker. He even stayed with us for days after my mom went missing, pretending to help look for her. When I said I never wanted to talk to you out both sides of my mouth while swallowing the center, this is the kind of talking I mean. He said, "Don't worry, we will find her. I have people canvassing the city. She is like a mother to me." The other side of his mouth said, "After I stabbed her, I dumped her body in the desert, and I will run as soon as the chance presents itself." In the defense's tapes, he talked and talked out both sides and then settled on me. He explained how my mother believed fundamentally that I was unstable. I had sat through any number of his lies, so it was a shock to hear something that might be true. But he was using unstable to mean untrustworthy. I am always unstable, but I also trust myself. 2 murders, 2 bodies, 2 courtrooms. I have struggled with talking about these when I write poetry. It turns out when there are multiples of these things, it becomes very difficult for a reader to differentiate them in a manuscript. I tried numbering them or referring to my first courtroom or the first time a woman I love was cut from the world. This, however, does not work so well because when there are multiples of these things, it becomes impossible, or at least not useful, to differentiate them. I think of the 2 deaths as bookends holding together a decade that is largely a blur. The moment after they found Siobhan's body, I woke up and started drinking. I didn't stop until just 9 months before my mother was killed, at the end of that decade. When the world has been mostly a blur for half your life, it becomes hard to differentiate anything from anything. In a process called limbic regulation, a mother's emotional brain trains her baby's nervous system to be like hers. For me, this meant from the start, my wiring was loosely connected, already shorting out, fragile, ready to blow unless I were to live an impossibly lucky life, which neither of us did. It's funny how the family and friends of people who were murdered are referred to as survivors of a violent crime. I wasn't there when either Siobhan or my mother were killed. I have only seen it happen by listening to witnesses who were accomplices to varying degrees. A man watching the knife go in my mother's chest through a cracked door from the other room. The man who tied the restraints and helped prepare Siobhan for sacrifice. I am not a survivor of these particular violent crimes. What I survive in this case are the stories told by other people and all the details of circumstance and intention outlined by the prosecution and witnesses in the courtrooms. I wonder what blows my body took as I sat on those wooden pews with the eyes of the jury on me, seeing them die. Each revelation a well-landed punch. The one, and I hope last time a man hit me in the face, it was a good shot, and I just looked back at him as if it were inevitable. I called in sick to work. I laughed when a counselor gave me the number for a women's shelter. I remember the look on his face the next morning when he saw my face better than I remember being hit. A look of self-hatred and sadness, of wishing to be swallowed up immediately by the earth. It matched my own so well. Some men who commit violence are what we might think of as monsters, displaying a total lack of empathy and remorse. And others are just human, fucked up, all too human and fucked up. Just because this was the first time this man hit me doesn't mean it was the first time he'd been violent. It just means it was the one time he used his fist. When I was young, I wrote books of poems mostly about this man and failed to mention it. The book ended with another man who died last year when his heart stopped suddenly. That man once didn't listen when I said no. I stopped him suddenly and named his actions out loud. I said, "This is about to be rape." He couldn't believe he could be the thing he was in that moment, but he was. He was a good man who saved my life many times. He loved me when I needed to be loved, even if I didn't know I needed it or how to ask. Isn't rape always about power? It should not be such a dangerous thing not to know your own desires, but he had kept hearing me say no when I meant yes. This situation was not equivalent to any other, but he didn't see that. I thought after finishing those books that I was done writing about men and about fucking, but their violence keeps intruding into my life, into my writing, so I'm calling it in, opening the door and putting on a pot of fucking coffee. I'm asking, what do I do? What if I could jack the whole fucked state of my body into pleasure? What if I could take this incessant state of fighting and flying and make it about fucking, which is maybe to say make it about love or desire, or whatever you call it when you know what you want and it's given without assumption or claim. The man I am fucking says, "I love women," and this utterance outlines a fundamental difference between us, as I will never be able to say, "I love men." But by deploying him as a category here, maybe I objectify and instrumentalize him in the same way he did me. Maybe giving a man permission to tie me up and fuck me lets me experience all these events as I naively imagine, safely. A place of refuge containing the violence of life where you can stop the tragedy before it occurs, make it an experiment about pleasure, a game where you can press pause if you need to. After my mom was stabbed to death and left in the desert, my body responded in an understandable and predictably symbolic way. I'd curl up for a week at a time, racked with sharp cramps so painful it was hard to walk. Now I wonder, was the process of limbic regulation continuing? Was my body feeling her death along with her? Then the pain spread everywhere and expanded its symbolic range. A constant, infuriating, dull ache, shooting pains in my legs when I walked, migraines lasting for days where I could only lie in a dark room. I started falling asleep driving even after 14 hours of sleep. I couldn't not sleep. All I wanted to do was sleep. It was as if my body had given up, had enough. I found myself in a very shitty vessel with a very large sea to cross. It is especially confusing to love a body that seems to hate you, that seems to have established a system of resisting its connection to the mind in a way that can't be overridden. Living in a traumatized body can feel like dragging a corpse around all the time. Grief can feel like dragging a corpse around all the time. Surely this is not a mistake. Writing this is a way of asking my body, what do you want? And also asking the bodies I'm dragging around, what do you want? This is why I love reading and writing theory, because it asks the world what it wants to be. It is, first and foremost, a lover's discourse. I spend a lot of time asking my body, as you would a lover you wanted to please, what do you want? And like me, when in the past a lover has asked me what I want, my body seems not to know, to have a hard time articulating anything but hurt. I immerse myself in hot water and wait. I try to take my medicine in a responsible way, despite my tendency to excess, and I wait. I ask again. The answer is always the same. I kept trying so hard to get my body out of pain, and then suddenly a man pulled my hair hard, wrapped his hands around my throat when we were fucking, tied me up, and my body was in heaven. Simple math, a negative times a negative makes a positive, right? I did not try to stop him when it happened. I didn't want it to stop. The last thing I wanted was for it to stop. What a joy to have this violence happening to me, and instead of wondering why won't it stop, please not, one more body decomposed beyond recognition in the desert, or with a neck covered in bruises the shape of hands and slathered in makeup. There was not enough to cover them. There never is. Feeling instead, I never wanted to stop. Just as the baby's nervous system absorbs how to be from the mother's starting in the womb, the baby also learns about being through the attitude in which its needs are met by the mother. If the mother fulfills a need like breastfeeding merely out of obligation, the baby will sense her reluctance and experience the interaction as toxic rather than nurturing. Therefore, those who are undermothered, I hardly had one even when I technically had one, are constantly ashamed of their needs, feeling them primarily as a burden others do not want to meet. And so when I had them met in one way without even having to say what they were, this felt like a kind of intuitive grace on the part of the other, a gift. It occurred to me less, perhaps, than it should have, that the similarities could be a real fucking problem, and that there may be no safe spaces for women in this world. The man I was fucking to me says, us fucking is so beautiful. The man I was fucking says to others, I've got her under my thumb, I'd date her if she lost 10 pounds. My analyst, through the short time I was fucking this man, perceived that a synchronicity was happening. We each seemed to have something particular to give each other, potentially, that the other person really needed given. It is now clear that what I imagined she meant when I spoke to her is not at all what she meant. Why does it seem that when a man and a woman teach each other something, the lesson always comes at the woman's cost? Insert this question into any power dynamic. Maybe real learning only comes at a great cost to both desirers outside these normative structures, but these exchanges of equal value seem rare. If desire has to do with love, to what extent is it also always about oppressing the other in some form? When is love not oppressive in some way? Deleuze and Guattari, A Thousand Plateaus might be my favorite book in the world, talk about how passage or becoming isn't a thing you make happen, it's a thing that awaits you, an inevitable exercise or experimentation. In the moment I just quoted, they are discussing the body without organs, but these two men who advance as a crowd, as they write, as they become woman, become animal, become molecular, also know that it is not always useful to fully differentiate one concept completely from another, since they inevitably overlap. One can try to make oneself a body without organs in many ways, and the possibility of failure is omnipresent. Some practices to try, be the hypochondriac body, the paranoid body, the schizo body, the drugged body, the masochist body. What happened, you must ask yourself if you fail? Were you cautious enough? Not wisdom, caution. The body without organs, they say, is desire, maybe as lover and oppressor. This makes sense to me because desire seems, yes, to be the best weapon with which to dismantle the organized self while holding together enough parts to get up the next day and try again, to follow another line of flight and see whether you crash and burn or catch a glimpse of something beyond. Desire is the thing with which you can block or be blocked and still experience an intensity, something beyond. Or sometimes you get stuck in the way an addict gets stuck in a smaller and smaller space while trying to get out. With the man who hit me in the face, there were many times I knew I should run away from him, like my life depended on it, as they say. I also remember a night when I woke up to him standing over me. In the morning, I discovered all the phones were disconnected. He could have slipped past any number of plausible lies, but instead just said in a rare moment of honesty, I was going to kill you. Once, when I was a girl with no defenses, he kicked me in the face as I was trying to get out of a tent and left me at the beach with no way back. And there I am, holding a warm can of beer in the back seat with a stranger's baby on my lap, filled with gratitude, on my way back. I drove back to that man days later with my face and my pride still hurting. I got in bed and let him make it up to me. Let him make it up. He said, I didn't think you'd come back. This time, I don't. Thanks.